Most executives arrive at the C-suite believing they understand power because up to that point, power has behaved in predictable ways. They have been promoted because they delivered results. They were trusted because they solved problems. They were given autonomy because autonomy produced outcomes and authority followed competence with enough consistency that it felt earned, even logical. By the time title arrived, many feel they have already been doing the job, only without formal recognition, and the promotion feels like validation rather than transformation. What follows is one of the most destabilizing realizations of an executive career. The C-suite does not work that way. Power at the executive level does not scale linearly with responsibility. It fragments, it diffuses, it hides behind structures, narratives, and incentives that are invisible until you collide with them. The illusion is not that power exists. It is that power belongs to you simply because the organization now holds you accountable. That illusion ends quickly. Power, accountability, and the illusion of authority. Hi, I'm Vardan, and you're watching the Vardan Ter-Antonyan Show. Let's go.
Welcome to the Vardan Ter-Antonyan Show. We're sitting down with authors, speakers, entrepreneurs, executives, and industry leaders to talk about business, leadership, and strategy. In a world where competition is ruthless, information is power, and decisions move markets, this is where leaders learn how to win. Let's get into it.
For most new CXOs, there is a moment, sometimes subtle, sometimes public, when accountability becomes unmistakably personal. A board question lands squarely on their function, a miss is attributed to their name, a risk is framed as their issue. The language shifts. Ownership is no longer collective and it is singular. This moment often arrives before the executive has had time to change anything meaningful. Budgets were set before arrival. Strategic commitments were made without their input. Key personnel decisions are constrained by history, politics, or optics. Systems are brittle. Culture is entrenched, and informal power networks around exits. Yet expectations do not pause. The executive is now responsible for outcomes they did not design, with tools they did not choose, operating within constraints they did not create. This experience is not unique. It's structural, and it is the first true test of whether an executive understands how power actually works. The instinctive reaction is frustration, of course. Why assign responsibility without authority? Why demand outcomes without granting control? The answer is uncomfortable, but it's rational. Organizations are risk-averse systems. Authority creates the capacity for change, and change introduces uncertainty. Uncertainty forces decisions. Decisions create winners and losers resist. Accountability, by contrast, is safe. It signals action without destabilizing existing arrangements, and it creates a visible owner without forcing an immediate redistribution of power. By separating accountability from authority, organizations preserve flexibility, observe how the executive behaves under pressure, assesses judgment without surrendering control, and retains optionality. The design protects the organizations and exposes the executives. Understanding this distinction early allows an executive to calibrate expectations. Misunderstanding it leads to overcommitment, premature conflict, and reputational damage. Titles carry psychological weight. They signal legitimacy and status both internally and externally. They shape how others speak to you and how you speak to yourself. What they do not guarantee is leverage. Many CXOs discover that their title grants them visibility rather than power. They're invited to meetings where decisions are discussed but not decided. They're consulted and priorities are set. They're informed after momentum has already formed. And the language of leadership reinforces the illusion. Executives are told they own functions, lead transformations, or have a seat at the table, so to speak. In practice, they often mean stewardship under constraint. A seat at the table guarantees exposure, but it does not guarantee influence. And exposure without insurance is a risk. This distinction matters more than most executives are prepared to accept. Power at the C-suite level is rarely concentrated in a single place. It manifests through different channels, each governed by the following rules. So formal authority is the most visible and the least potent. It's confirmed by titles, reported structures, and job description. Formal authority establishes accountability and legitimacy. It defines who answers when questions arise. But what it does not do is determine what actually happens. Operational authority determines what you can execute without negotiation, which includes a discretion over budgets, headcounts, timelines, and prioritization. Operational authority enables speed, without which execution becomes persuasion, and persuasion consumes political capital. Narrative authority governs interpretation and determines whose explanations are trusted and whose framing becomes reality and who is given the benefit of the doubt when outcomes disappear. Narrative authority is invisible but decisive. Executives with it survive mistakes. Executive without it are removed despite results. Most first-time CXOs are granted formal authority. Some receive partial operational authority, and almost none begin with narrative authority. That must be earned or borrowed from those who already hold it. Failing to distinguish between these forms of authority is one of the most common causes of executive miscalculation. Accountability is easy to assign, and power is costly to give away. Assigning accountability clarifies ownership and reassures stakeholders. Granting power redistributes control and forces trade-offs. Every transfer of authority weakens someone else's position, reduces optionality, or accelerates conflict. As a result, organizations move accountability quickly and authority cautiously. They test executives under constraint before granting leverage. They watch how decisions are framed, how conflict is handled, and how risk is managed. The executive experiences this as imbalance, but the organization experiences it as prudence. The danger arises when executives assume this imbalance is temporary and self-correcting. Sometimes it is, often it's not. Executives who wait passively for authority to arrive often discover that it never does. If there is one constrained indicator of real power in a C suite, it is control over capital. Budgets determine not only what gets done, but what gets attention. Initiatives that are funded are discussed, and those that are not quietly fade. Budget authority allows executives to shape priorities without confrontation. Executives who control capital can accelerate initiatives without debate, delay execution without refusal, and starve programs without public conflict. Executives without budget authority must persuade those who have it, which consumes time, energy, and political capital. Over time, this erodes influence. This dynamic explains why certain roles, particularly those adjacent to capital, risk, or external stakeholders, wield disproportionate influence regardless of organizational rhetoric. It's not favoritism, it's structure. Executives often assume that information is neutral, data is data, and reports speak for themselves. They do not. Information is selected, framed, and sequenced. What is measured signals what matters. What is emphasized shapes perception. What is delayed buys time, and what is aggregated obscures variance. Executives who influence reporting structures shape reality before decisions are discussed. They determine which issues surface early and which remain peripheral. They influence not only what leadership sees, but how it feels about what it sees. Executives without influence over information flow are perpetually reactive. They respond to narratives they did not create. By the time they speak, conclusions have already formed. This is not manipulation, it's power. Many high performing executives resist the idea that the C suite is political. They associate politics with incompetence or bad faith. They prefer to believe that decisions at the top are driven by logic and evidence. Logic and evidence matter, but they're not sufficient. The C-suite is a system of overlapping mandates, identities, and incentives. Each executive represents not just a function, but a domain of relevance, and decisions redistribute attention, resources, and status as well. Executives are therefore evaluated not only on what they do, but on how their actions affect others. Clarity can be destabilizing in systems that rely on ambiguity, not function. And excellence can threaten equilibrium. This is why resistance often emerges not against bad ideas, but against uncomfortable implications. Most first-time CXOs come from environments where success is translated into autonomy. They solved problems and were rewarded with trust, and influence followed performance. In C-suite, success can create unintended consequences. For example, fixing one problem can expose another. Improving one function can highlight another's weakness, or speed can force decisions others are not prepared to face. Executives who push aggressively often encounter resistance that feels irrational. It's not. The system is reacting to perceived loss of control. The executive experiences obstruction, the system experiences threat, and both responses are rational within their respective frames. Executives frequently distribute their roles as owning a function. The language is comforting. It suggests control, but in reality, most CXOs are stewards, accountable for outcomes shaped by dependencies they do not control and decisions they did not make. When results falter, those executives internalize failure and start working harder, pushing faster, escalating conflict, and in doing so, they often accelerate their own isolation. Recognizing this limits of your authority is not weakness, it is calibration. Occasionally, executives are granted authority without alignment. They receive a large budget, a public mandate, or visible endorsement, but lack deep trust or peer support. This authority is brittle. It invites challenges, attracts scrutiny, and accelerates conflict. Durable authority requires alignment with the CEO's priorities. The board's tolerance for risk, peers, incentives, and identities, because without alignment, authority becomes temporary leverage rather than lasting power. When executives misjudge their authority, the consequences are rarely framed accurately. Overcommitment becomes poor judgment. Escalation becomes lack of alignment. Resistance becomes not a team player. Reputations erode not because executives were wrong, but because they misread leverage. These errors accumulate quietly until trust collapses. Executives who survive and thrive in the C suite do not abandon principles. They recalibrate expectations, clarify decision rights before committing, distinguish influence from control, build narrative authority patiently, and decline accountability without authority. This is not cynicism, it's professional maturity. Executives who internalize this model make better decisions about which roles to accept, which battles to fight, and when to exit. All the educational episodes of the show can be found in a book I recently published called C-Suite Bible: How Executive Careers Are Won, Lost, and Survived. The book also explains in details the playbooks for C-suite roles such as CEO, CFO, COO, CSO, CMO, CIO, CTO, CPO, and CHRO, along with the operating system of the individual role, or documentation they work with, they create, monitor, present to the board, and so on. This book should be all you need to succeed in C Suite. The book can be purchased on Amazon, and the link can be found in the website www.csuitebible.com altogether. In the next episode, we will discuss how the C Suite character changes with the company size and phase, which is arguably one of the most important aspects of successful C-suite career. Thank you for watching the third episode of the show. Until next time.